The Nashville Predators, a franchise which has for so long been mired in mediocrity with flashes of elite play and deep playoff runs, no longer content to allow their elite talent to languish, the Predators went all in this offseason in the hopes that they can finally break through and win that elusive first championship. But have these changes been enough to put Nashville among the elite contenders in the Western Conference?
I admit it. Last year was rough.
The Predators had a very inconsistent start to the 2023-24 season. They were actually 5 games under 500 in the middle of November after a stretch where they lost 8 of 9 games. They immediately turned that around following that stretch with one where they won 13 of 16 games and then basically cemented themselves as one of the playoff teams by winning 16 of 18 games in February and March. They didn't make any big swings at the deadline. Their biggest acquisition was Jason Zucker from the Coyotes for a very minimal return, just a 6th-round pick. But with how the Nashville Predators had constructed their roster, including big adds in the offseason like Gustav Nyquist and Ryan O'Reilly, they felt like they were in a good spot. Preds managed to secure one of the wildcard spots and faced the Vancouver Canucks in this first round of the playoffs. It looked from the onset to be one of the more competitive matchups in the playoffs, and that was ultimately the case, with 5 of the 6 games being decided by 1 or fewer goals, counting the first game, which ended 4-2 after an empty netter. And while the Predators came up on the short end of the stick, there was a belief that if a few things had went differently, namely power play effectiveness and being able to hold on to leads, the Predators were a team that could be a legitimate contender. Andrew Burnett is one of the more enigmatic coaches in the NHL, in my opinion. He clearly has talent and ability to draw the most out of his teams. He did it in Florida with their first President's Trophy win, and he did it in Nashville with an impressive season last year. Problem is when he gets to the playoffs, his teams just have a propensity to implode on themselves, and that was very much on display last year. The Preds choked away a sure win in Game 4 and actually lost 2 of 3 games in the series where they led after 2 periods, which was made worse by the fact that they weren't even facing Thatcher Demko for most of the series. Burnett's job is probably safe for all of this year unless the Predators just go on a complete cold snap for a large portion of the season, but he's going to be largely judged by how this team does in the playoffs and how much he's able to adjust his tactics.
You're a star, you're on top, somebody bring you some hair.
You should kill yourself.
When it comes to the star for the Predators, there are 3 names you could credibly name: Philip Forsberg, Jussi Saros, and Roman Josi. For me, personally, I'm going to go with Jussi Saros because A, he just got into a big old contract extension, 8 years, $62 million. B, I think it's almost indisputable that he's a top 5 goalie in the NHL. And C, talking about Philip Forsberg for more than 3 seconds makes you go into a blind rage. Curiously, after signing that big contract, Saros had a pretty down year by his standards, a .906 save percentage, a GAA above 2.7, and actually a negative goal saved above expected per 60 for the first time in his career. But 1 year does not, in my opinion, outweigh an entire career of elite play, and if Saros bounces back to even anything close to his peak form, which is still very possible since he's not even 30 years old, the Predators are always going to be a tough team to beat.
Oh, this guy again.
The Predators' top 6 is just so incredibly loaded, starting in the middle with Ryan O'Reilly centering the first line. He's not the player he was back in St. Louis, leading them on their cup runs, largely due to injuries over the last few years, but he was healthy all of last year, putting up 69 points, nice, in 26 goals in 82 games. A great leader for this team, and a steadying influence who can play both ways. It's hard to do much better for your first line center than Ryan O'Reilly. He'll be between Gustav Nyquist, who was brought in before last season, who balances out O'Reilly a bit with a more cerebral approach and a very creative playmaker, and on his opposite wing, Philip Forsberg, who continues to torture myself and Capitals fans every time he puts up a 40-goal, 90-point season, which is basically every year. Seriously, it makes my blood boil to think that we allowed George McPhee to be GM of this team for 2 decades. For the second line, it's largely remade with big acquisitions like Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, but Tommy Novak is still there to center the two. Still maybe not even hitting his prime at age 27, he only put up 45 points last year, and I'd expect that to improve this year with 2 legit scoring threats alongside him. On the third line, Colton Sissons is back, a prototypical 2-way player. He's mainly focused on his own end, but did score a respectable 15 goals and 35 points last year. Mark Jankowski, on the other hand, is just a big, slow, bad forward who can't score, so they stuck him on the third line for some reason. And rounding out the third line, Luke Evangelista, a pure playmaker who has absolutely absolutely nobody to distribute the puck to on this line. Should be great for his development, Nashville. On the bottom pairing is just 3 big guys who play defense and nothing else, although Michael McCarron was a first-round pick 10 years ago. Brunette and GM Barry Trotz both seem to have a type. On the defense, Roman Josi is of course the #1 defenseman and the #1 defenseman on just about every NHL team. He's still very clearly a top 10 D-man in the league, getting paired with another big acquisition in the offseason in Brady Shea. The problem these Predators have is that their defensive core is just so top-heavy. The second pairing of Jeremy Lauzon and William Carrier is honestly a bit embarrassing. Lauzon is a mediocre physical defenseman better suited to the bottom pair, while Carrier fits the second pairing bill a bit better as a smoother puck-moving defenseman who is a bit limited defensively because of his size. Now, I mentioned Lauzon should be on the bottom pairing. The problem is that they already have a worse version of him in Luke Schenn, who is just slow, old, and hits. Like Lauzon, he'll be paired with another puck-moving defenseman of his own in Spencer Stastny, who's young and unproven, but has some offensive skill just like Carrier. Saros figures to be the starting goaltender as long as he's healthy, and like I said, one of the best in the NHL, but Scott Wedgwood as a backup is kinda confusing considering you had Kevin Lankinen behind, who did admirably in a pinch and would be cheaper than Wedgwood, who is also just terrible. Like,
Oh, Brit is in this?
Like I said at the outset, the Nashville Predators went shopping this offseason and came back with some highly talented players on both the offensive and defensive sides of the puck. Steven Stamkos is the headliner, leaving Tampa Bay after over a decade as that franchise's face and leader. Even though he's on the back end of his career, he still scored 40 goals last year, so it's surprising that Tampa Bay let him walk, really bungled that situation, and Nashville was smart to snap him up at a pretty reasonable 4-year, $8 million a year deal. Ditto for Jonathan Marchessault, a cap casualty in Vegas, whose $5.5 million price tag is pretty good, but the fact that it's a 5-year term for a guy who's 33 and had his only 40-goal season last year, bit worrying for how that contract will look in year 3 and 4. On the back end though, Brady Shea might have been the biggest acquisition of them all. I was really shocked the Hurricanes didn't prioritize bringing back Shea, considering in my opinion he's one of the better first-pairing defensemen in the NHL. He's a perfect Robin to Roman Josi's Batman, a premier puck-moving defenseman, and getting him for a 7x7 just turning 30 was a great move by Barry Trotz in my opinion. Absolutely love what Nashville did over the offseason.
That's not bad.
Honestly, I like everything that Nashville did in their roster construction. They're strong down the center, they've got a good first pairing defensively, they got an elite goaltender who they paid as such. There's no real flaws in the Nashville Predators roster. One person I do think gets a little less love from the rest of the league than he should is Alexander Carrier, just hitting his prime at age 28, but has already established himself to be a very solid puck-moving defenseman on the second pairing. Really rare to see a guy with his skill set get PK minutes, but Carrier has done it in the past, and it gives the Predators an extra dimension when they're a man down.
The Gambletron 2000 says the winner is Cincinnati by 200 points. Why, you worthless hunk of junk?
If you couldn't tell, I am very high on the Nashville Predators. The only thing really holding them back, well, is that they're in the same division as the Dallas Stars, who are a really, really good team. There's also the Andrew Burnett question. Is he a coach who's going to be able to get you on a deep playoff run, or is he slowly turning into a Todd McClellan, Pete DeBoer type coach who's going to get you really good regular seasons and then not do much of anything in the playoffs? The evidence is trending that way, and honestly, looking at this roster, there's no excuse for the Nashville Predators not to make it at least to the second round this year.
Arrogance from 2017 onwards.
Well, at least you get to run out the rest of Stamkos and Marchessault's careers on first and second round losses.
They have Forsberg? Fuck them. What a disaster trade. I never want to look at him again.
Is this going to be it? Is this going to be the year where the Predators finally do something? No, probably not.